Welcome to Want of Whispers. This is the third episode, and my name is HighTac. Today we will have a small beginner's guide to free for all. And with me today from California, Vyvanne. Hi.
Hey, what's up?
How are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm fine too. Thanks. So, yeah, as we discussed previously, we just wanted to provide an introduction to like the free for all mode in general, which we too love very much, and it can be a bit tricky for newcomers to start. The ladder nowadays isn't what it has been some years ago, so it's a bit tricky to just get used to the special characteristics of the mode and to really improve. So we'll try to provide some information and some tips and tricks. So to begin with, you want to tell the listeners how you started to play FFA and
Absolutely. Yeah, I came from the solo kind of scene. I'm Korean. I grew up in Korea, and so I was pretty much right there when Warcraft 3 was at its peak in Korea. For instance, I was very, very, very privileged to be able to see when Mad Frog was there. I was there when he won the on game net Soma Pro League in 2004, where he won it all and being like as a foreigner in Korea. And just like in StarCraft, being a foreigner in a very Korean dominated game, that was a big deal. So he was my huge inspiration. I took a lot of strategies from him. And then it was sometime in 2004, like my memory's a little hazy, when WarcraftReplays.com, for people who remember that old website, they released a guide and kind of an article about Inferno Rice. And so for old school American players, they'll recognize that name. He was I think he's actually Chinese or Korean, Asian dude. He was one of the first huge like legendary names in ladder. He played Orc. He plays a hyper aggressive strat with Farseer, and he just dominated free for all. And that article, I think I'd started right before then, or maybe I was inspired by that. And that's what got me into trying this game style. And yeah, here I am 15 years later, still playing free for all.
and so does Matt Frog just tonight.
Really? Okay.
He just tonight he played a Clan War. But I guess you played for longer than he did. I think he paused for like 10 years. So but I mean many of us paused. But do you remember if you played mostly ladder back then, or was it like a mix between ladder and competitive FFA?
Let's see. It was mostly ladder. Like I remember, and it was I had made friends with Ugra at some point as well. And
Yeah.
I'm sure many of our FFA folks who know how him and how he kind of was a big driving force behind FFA in like kind of the Western scene outside of the US. He got me into it, and I do remember the start of FML. And I know I played it at the beginning at some point, but I didn't really compete very much. I think that's like some of the middle seasons. I played some games, and then that's when I sort of stopped playing Warcraft in general.
Yeah, and I think it's I think starting with FFA is like ladder is or always has been the door opener to FFA. Obviously, like you can just start a ladder FFA match with just a click. And from I think the learning curve for like players that do know some Warcraft 3 basics, it's pretty easy like to get used to some basics in FFA and just to win some matches, but it can I think the frustration for players that start playing FFA by just playing some ladder matches and that are not like pro players or very strong players in the solo scene is like it's easy for them to start and the frustration comes later. I think for players
Yes,
that
absolutely.
are really good, and that's something we saw in recent years also for players that are really good in one-on-one and that are used to win a lot of matches, like to win 80-90% of their usual ladder matches, and may do the same in the current FFA ladder. But once they get into competitive FFA, I assume, or at least that's what we saw, there's a certain frustration level if like they do not see the same level of success as they are used to from their one-on-ones. So that's why I think it's important to just distinguish between like the casual Warcraft 3 player and the one that is already very successful in other game modes. So and I think that's also a bit of a challenge these days, because as mentioned, like ladder isn't as active anymore. So I do think like there's a chance that it may become, like, hopefully that it'll become more active again in Reforged. But
oh yes, I'm very looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. And I hope it's going to be sustainable for like at least some time. And many people or many players do miss that. However, like if like looking at or going back to the beginner's guide that we wanted to talk about, basically, I at least I think ladder is nothing you can really rely on these days. Like ladder is very unreliable. You don't know how active it's going to be depending on your time zone, and you don't really know what level of players are going to be active. So that's why I think ladder is a bit tricky these days.
Yeah. So kind of going to have our little bullet points here. When I get started. So we've jotted down some things that we kind of tackle as sort of main topics. And so one thing, I mean, again, so I'm sure many of our folks that are currently listening might be longtime listeners or I guess players. But for any new player, what's the best way to get started? I would say, I mean, it is very, at least for in that aspect, I think you hit a good point, is that from just playing the game is very similar to how you approach it to like one-on-one if you want to get good at it, right? You have to of course practice a lot. You're probably going to lose a lot of games, but what sets FFA apart is that it takes a very unique set of skills that is not at all in one-on-one or even team games. And this kind of leads into our next bullet point is, why should I play free-for-all? Why should I play? Why should I play this game mode versus one-on-one?
Yeah.
And I have kind of some thoughts for that.
Sorry. Yeah, sure. No, go ahead.
So what draws FFA, I think, that we keep playing is that it is a very unique approach to the game, because in one-on-one or team games, there is only one objective, and there's only for the teams. You either win or you lose. There's only two outcomes, and that's the same for team games. One team has to win and the other team has to lose, and that's it. In free-for-all, there are 4 players looking for that one objective, and more importantly, only one person can achieve it. And so because of that adds a social dynamic that is entirely unique to free-for-all, and it changes the way you have to approach the game. And so it almost, this is not the greatest analogy, but because the game's style is so different, I almost feel like I'm playing a different game. Like, say, you have your one-on-one or your custom games. Like free-for-all is like a quote-unquote a mod to the game almost, because it changes it so much. That's kind of how I think of it. Another thing and we'll kind of go into that a little bit later as far as like teaming and like how that affects the social dynamic and whatnot. But another cool thing about free-for-all is that every player has a unique fingerprint, which is very evident in free-for-all and not so much in one-on-one games. Like if you take the top 10 undead players in the world, for instance, in one-on-one, if you cover up their names, okay, maybe Happy, I can tell because like their micro is insane, but like, or 120, but maybe the top 3 to 10, I don't know if I can like reliably say, oh, this is so-and-so, this is Sidey, or this is Badfrog, or whatever. It's pretty hard to find that generally. But in free-for-all, if I cover up someone's name, if I just watch them play, watch their base layout, watch how they chat, I can pretty confidently say, oh, this is so-and-so, just because it is such a adds that unique element that your personality as a player comes through very differently, and you kind of see that in StarCraft 1 and a little bit in StarCraft 2. And that's another thing that they've talked about a lot, is that this unique fingerprint that is very evident in free for all.
Yeah, and I think that's something to like. You can really, even if you lose some matches, if you start building your own style and like, it's much easier to build your own style or to create your own style in FFA and be successful with it, compared to one-on-one, where it will probably be much harder to really play a style that's totally different than the meta that became meta for a reason. So it's tricky, and obviously there are some players that play similar styles. In general, I'd say, like, from a FFA, like, why, like, if someone would ask me, okay, why do you play a mode that's like where matches usually take much longer, like play at least half an hour and sometimes 1 or 2 hours, or even longer, but usually like you need to plan for 1 to 1.5 hours on certain maps. So why start a match that takes longer and where your chances are lower to be the victorious player in the end? And like, I think personally it's much more, first of all, I think it's fun to just like, it's a totally different experience. It takes more time and you build up something, like it has like even more of an RTS feeling, I think, because you need to build up more. It's more about economy, creeping, like you can spend more time on creep routes on certain maps or to prepare them, and eventually it's much more rewarding to really take a win. So that's for me, like, it feels much better to win a 1 hour game than it is to win a random 2v2 game or one-on-one game. So I think that's a huge reward. And as I mentioned earlier, if you know, like, Warcraft 3 basics, and there are many players on ladder that rarely win any games. So they may win, let's say, 5 of 100 games. So there are these players, and sometimes I feel a bit sad for them. On the other hand, I admire their endurance, so that they always go for another match. And on the other hand, like, I myself, well, I was such a player. I didn't play as many games, but I played a style that was very similar to the one that I played in 2v2. I didn't watch many replays, so that was a big, like, that would have helped me for sure to realize, like, the failures. And so in general, if I think, just for all the beginners that have no clue of FFA, I think there are just a few basics, and if you follow them, you will have way more success, and the chances are way higher that you're going to win a game. So first of all, it's like building up an economy. So 800 gold is not a lot of gold in FFA terms. So on maps with a lot of expansions, if you stick to one main mine only, or just to one expansion, other players will just outmine you and will have way more gold in the long run to just just kill you with like a way higher gold count. So just be aware that you take expansions, take at least 2 expansions at some point in the game. You don't need to do that early, but I think taking expansions is really like a good thing to start with. And then second, don't like engage with multiple enemies. So you want to fight one player at once, unless you have plenty of gold and the other 2 players are weaker than you, but you don't actively want to enforce fights with 2 different players at the same time. And third, I think that's very important, that you have enough production buildings to really pump up from, and that's like, and combined with that you are very keen on your supply, so that you don't just stay on 100 supply all game. but that you've dropped down to 80 or to 50 supply, but on the flip side have enough protection buildings to so you are able to train units very quickly and being able to defend and react. So I think if you follow these like 4 tips, it will already like make every starter, every beginner way more successful.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really good point you brought up, that you can success in free-for-all without necessarily being the most mechanically gifted player. Like in one-on-one, you know, if you play somebody, you have to at least have a bare minimum of mechanics, like micro and macro and like strategies and all that kind of stuff. But in free-for-all, we see players who, you know, again, on paper, may not have as good micro or whatnot, but you'll see them win games like consistently and regularly. And there's these other factors that come in, and again, because it is the last person standing that wins. So in theory, I can click everything. I don't have to use any hotkey, but if I say stay in the background, or if I choose my fights wisely and I just attack a move, I can still win a fight potentially. And so that's where you have, and because there's the level of skill, like quote unquote skill for a free for all game, expands more than just, oh, I can micro my units better than you, and that's because I won. Sure, everybody benefits from better micro, but we've seen plenty of like championship rank 1 players who, again, on paper are not as strong as, say, another player who can out micro them, but they're either mastery of like manipulation or like reading a game, which is one of those things where it just kind of comes with time. Is like understanding, oh, I see that you've mined, and good scouting, that's like a huge factor, more so than in one-on-one. It allows you to read how a game is going and then kind of make your decisions from there.
Yes, I think that's a good point. I think scouting is very key, and it helps to improve the game sense. And it's sometimes hard for players that are playing FFA for some time, or that have been playing FFA for some time, to really put ourselves into the shoes of someone who just started, and you get blamed very quickly in FFA for something you unwillingly caused. So if you didn't help someone, if you attacked the wrong player, in your eyes you just attacked someone, but it may have been the only player that could have helped you to defeat the only other remaining player. So there are failures that everybody makes, and it's just easy to get blamed for something. So frustration is something like I personally started with FFA by like playing some matches on ladder, but mostly just observing many in-house matches that were played within the FFA Masters community. I watch replays and I watch former VODs of FML matches, and that really helped me to get an understanding of the game flow and of things that usually happen in FFA, and to really get a game sense. And later on, once you start playing, like it takes some time, but for us, it's just way more obvious. Like obviously, like everyone makes mistakes every now and then, but still, like you get some sort of sense what happens on the other side of the map, and what move is like a good move and what move you should generally avoid. And I think, observing and watching replays is really helpful. And I think early frustration is probably like the biggest reason why people leave behind the FFA mode after some time. So I'm trying to look for ways to avoid that early frustration. So what's your opinion on like the frustration level?
Well, that is one of those like kind of a quote, like a con of free for all, is that it is, while there's a lot of great things about free for all, like funny things, there's also lots of not so fun things. And so dealing with early frustration is something that, all players are just going to have to kind of learn how to deal with. And so, of course, like, um, your point is a good thing is like honestly trying to watch some games of like, let's look at like what people consider was like a really good game, is watch them, go, okay, so why is so and so making a decision to attack so and so, and you'll see that in the chat. So it'll be things like, oh, why you hit me, and someone will say, well, because you are mining a lot, or you can say, hey, blue has 5 mines, blue has 10 heroes, they need to die. Like the chat and social dynamic, again, it adds something that's so different than one-on-one. And so kind of reading that, it will take time. It is one of those things that you just kind of have to keep doing, kind of grind through, and see, where does the game lead. From a mechanics perspective, kind of the tips that we mentioned earlier would be helpful. So things, making sure to grab some extra mines, things like, okay, well, or did you T1 rush someone, and did somebody, was somebody on the other side of the map creeping, they got tier 3, and then they came with 100 food of chimeras. It's the dealing with the teaming and manipulation. The first part I would say is just accept it's going to happen. It's, because as an earlier point is that because only one person can win, the balance of power shifts throughout the match, and at some point you will probably be the strongest player, and at some point you might be the weakest player. And so because of that, teaming is a thing that's going to happen naturally. Like, two players are going to at some point band together to go after the strongest player, because if you don't, then what happens? The strongest player just like kills one person, then kills the next person, then kills the next person. And that's what we kind of tend to call like, a quote unquote free win. Like, they were the strongest, the other players did not team together to take down that player, and then it's a quote unquote not as good of a game. Again, these are all kind of like very basics or like generics I'm kind of putting out.
Yep.
That is like how sometimes games can go. And so to prevent that, and to prevent, or to allow a chance for the, 2 or 3 other weaker players to get back into the game, is that they'll form a temporary alliance. And that's the key factor, is that, and that's like one of the other cons of ladder, is that sometimes, yes, you'll run into cheaters or like people that are on purpose blatantly pre-teaming. They both enter the game knowing that the other person is there, and they're going to say, hey, we're going to kill this other player together at the same time. And you'll see this it's pretty evident when like 5 minutes into the game you have 2 players in your base, or like rushing your expansion, and that is absolutely frowned upon. We do not want that to happen, and that just leads for a very unfun game. But temporary teaming together is going to happen. So hey, blue is really strong, you hit their expansion, I'll hit their main, or whatever.
Yeah.
And dealing with that is, you'll have to, there's probably some justification. You do have stronger hero levels, or if you have a lot of gold, or you were maybe a little bit too greedy and took like 5 mines instead of 3 because it's a 4-player map, something like that.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of that risk reward factor that you have to kind of look at when you're playing. It's like, okay, do I want to be greedy and like take extra mines, or do you feel like you're in a position to do that?
Yeah.
And so to, how to deal with that, part of it, is like understanding, is kind of asking yourself, was it justified? Did I have like, high level heroes and everybody else is like level 3? Can you take that fight? And so some of what I personally find really fun is that I kind of enjoy, if I'm like rush somebody and I'm in a strong position, how long can I last in a 2v1? Because, and it's one of those things where like if 2 players come with full armies, pretty much nobody can win that. Like, it doesn't matter if you're happy, if there's 2 players with full 100 armies in your base, unless you have like a enormous disgusting hero advantage, or like mass moonwell, something that will kind of tip the balance in your favor like heavily, you're probably not going to win that fight. Even if you have micro as good as happy. And so dealing with, and then you have to kind of figure out, how do I deal with this? How do I turn this around into now me losing 2v1 into maybe a win? Because that's when, you can maybe start talking back and say, hey, look, I lost my main base. I'm now not the strongest. We need to kill red because they teamed with you, but hey, red is now the strongest. We need to go against them. And so that shifting balance of power is most evident in a three-way game, when, like, for instance, one person gets rushed out, they leave the game or are eliminated, and now it's a three-way where that balance of power is now much trickier. Because in a four-way, you can have, let's say, what we used to call, like, quote unquote, a balanced free-for-all game was 2 one-on-ones where 2 players fought and the other 2 players fought. There's a clear winner and a loser. The 2 losers either leave the game or are eliminated, and now there's a final one-on-one. That was what we kind of considered a little bit so today, but that's where you have like a clean game again, quote unquote. But very often that's not how it goes. One person leaves, and now you have 3 people, and so it's harder to balance that because if 2 people are fighting, then the third person just kind of can sit there at 50 food, hoard a lot of gold, and just go, well, you guys keep fighting, and I'm just gonna sit here and get a lot of gold. And hey, you guys are both weak. Let me jump to 100 food and kill you both.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's, like, to some degree, I personally find a lot of fun in playing balancing 3 ways. But obviously, like, being the one that gets teamed, I think, like, it's something that, like, that just, it's just part of balancing, that everyone needs to, needs to be kept in check, and everyone needs to be weakened. Usually, if it's like really balanced, someone needs to win. So usually, like, you don't necessarily need to get teamed, but usually at some point in the game you will get attacked by either a stronger player, or if you remain the strongest player throughout the game, at some point you will probably get teamed. And I think it can be like, it's easier to take that. Like, obviously you would try to defend it most of the time, but if you can't, it can be kind of a relief sometimes, because, like, unless the players really try to finish you off, but usually if they just try to weaken you, I personally think for me, it's easy to take that, and it's just part of the game. I think it's much more difficult, like, frustration wise, to, as I mentioned, either be teamed out entirely because the 2 remaining players just want to play one-on-one, which I think can be very frustrating, or to face someone who's really not using gold at all and is just trying to find a way out of the situation by manipping and by just lying from start to finish. And I understand that can be very frustrating. I was a player myself who manipped quite a lot. It became a bit less. For example, you don't manip at all usually. Like, you don't even talk in a match, which like, again, is a sign for, like, different play styles that you can use, and you can be successful with it. But I think it's like, if in order to really stick with this game mode and have fun with it and not get really, like, there were people in the past who really became frustrated and negatively influenced by FFA because it's so like, it can be very challenging for your mind to really face multiple other players that are lying to you, that are flaming you. And I personally think if you really don't try to take it from game to game and you don't try to hold grudges, like, it's totally fine. And it's more of a valve, like, for me personally, that you can, like, FFA is more open to flaming to some degree, so it's not like, I think that's fine, and it's even fun, and it like, it's some practice even for real life situations. So if you play FFA, I think you need to be able to take that or learn how to accept that, and to some degree it's part of that. But obviously, if you, like, it's more fun in, like, certain playstyles are more fun to face than others. So I think everyone should be aware, and that's especially for the ones that maybe just started or that have some FFA experience and want to play competitive FFA, that I think everyone should be aware that the play style he or she adapts to or uses also like the 4 players are in a game, and 4 players will define how entertaining the game is going to be for viewers. And if it's going to be a 6-hour manip shit show, then as we had in previous seasons, then that's not likely to be a good marketing for FFA in general. So I think everyone needs to be like, at some point you need to use your gold, and you need to be willing to fight. I personally think that's like, in the past, like until like some month ago even, I may have thought otherwise, but after like dealing with some feedback and dealing with the previous season in particular, I think it's just not entertaining. And if you want to promote the league, or want to promote FFA in general, you need to bring some entertainment value to the table as a player. And I think like the more active you play, the more like the more fun it's going to be for everyone. So
Yeah, I guess, sorry, maybe clarified slightly again for any new player. Manip is short for manipulation, which is kind of the art of typing in chat and getting a player to do something that is in your benefit that maybe necessarily isn't for theirs. So to give an example, let's say I'm getting attacked by blue, and I say, oh, and I start typing, hey, blue is attacking me, go attack blue. Blue has like, and I can, very often it involves exaggerating, another player's strength to try to manipulate the others into attacking them. So I'm like, hey, go attack blue. Blue has 10 expansions. He has 10 heroes. I'm gonna die here. When reality is maybe they only have like 3. They only have like 2 mines. You're trying to get the other players to do something that will benefit you more than it may benefit them. And that's a tactic that, again, just comes with practice. Some players, use it like chat a lot. Kind of to you mentioned earlier, I don't really do that a whole lot. I don't tend to talk a lot, and which is funny because that was, again, a unique fingerprint. I remember people would recognize me in ladder because I made it a point that I would never talk in games, and so people would be like, "Hey, green orc," because I used to play orc back in the day, inspired by Inferno Race and Shadow Soul, another fantastic orc player. Would be like, "Hey, blue orc is going Dark Ranger, and orc ground is not talking. I'm pretty sure that's whatever my old name was, Vyvanne. Go attack them," or stuff like this. Like another kind of unique identifier. But yeah, and honestly, that's like the really fun thing about free for all is that you make your own fun in that how you want to play the game, which again kind of leads back to the whole unique fingerprint idea, is that people have such radically different play styles because for them that's what's fun. I find fun in trying to use my mechanical skill in like with micro and winning a game that way, and saying like, hey, I'll probably get 2v1 at some point. Can I win a game using this, and trying not to talk if possible? And that's what I personally find fun. So like with that mentality, I accept that it's probable that I won't win championships or anything like that if I stick to that like religiously, because I do understand that manip and chat is a part of the game, and so if I disengage from that, I probably will lose games that I maybe could have won if I started talking like, hey, don't attack me anymore, I'm not the strongest, or whatever.
yeah.
And that's fine too. Again, like if you don't find fun at that, that's up to you. But just like acknowledging that is a part of the game is just gonna have to be, a thing. Like it's just gonna happen in free for all, because again, there is that social element to the game that you do not see in a 1-on-1. Like in 1-on-1, you can't be like, don't attack me anymore, I'm not the weakest. It's like, no, that's the point. Like I need to beat just you, and then I win the game.
Yeah, and I mean that's part of the fun also, like that this kind of psychological warfare, it doesn't even necessarily like it doesn't have to be lying. It can be like you can be overly nice to another player and overly honest, and maybe that like increases the chance of that player not finishing you off, for example, in the game, or so it's that makes it very interesting. So the whole, there's a very asymmetrical dimension to FFA. So there are a lot of ways to win, and I think there's a lot to it, but I understand if people get frustrated by it. I think it's something that everyone needs to learn, like everyone needs to endure it to some degree if they want to play FFA for a longer time, because rather sooner than later you will face manip, and you just need to try to find a way to deal with it. If you don't want to react with counter manip, then as you do it quite frequently, just go for aggression. And I think that's super fun. I just for beginners, I think it's important to point out it's tempting to just follow a playstyle where you prevent fighting at all. And I think to some degree it's it's not bad to hoard a lot of gold, but at some point it will help to at least train or practice or start fighting. So everyone will get some free wins at some point by just sitting around and being lucky that all the other players ignored that new player and killed each other off, and then it was the new player who could just roll with a big army over everyone. But I personally don't think it's very, very rewarding to really get your first victory, however you get it. But in the long run, at some point, it's more useful to really start fighting and at least using gold, because that's something that you need to get used to, how to fight. And if you only sit in your main base, it's much more difficult to really understand how what happens out on the map, and how players react to you being an active player. So I think it's important to just try different styles and do not just hope for the free win. So that may work in ladder more often, because in ladder usually other players are not, most players are not as aware of, they don't really have awareness of other players that they are not engaged with. So it's more easy to just take free wins on ladder, at least nowadays. But for players that want to get into competitive FFA, it's just not the way you will be successful with in the beginning. So just to point that out. On the that would be something I have on my list still when it comes to races in general, to Warcraft 3 races. I like to just point out the differences and what race to play, and just the basic knowledge about every race in terms of FFA. So you want to start with Undead?
Yeah, of course. So very often, one of the questions a lot of new players may ask is, what's the strongest race in free for all? It's honestly, it's one of the things that's it's honestly pretty tricky to answer, just because. Well, I guess, okay, if we're going to be very, very broad, generally speaking, most people tend to agree human is probably is human the strongest, quote unquote, and then
everyone agrees that orcs, I think most people agree that orc is the weakest in general, but I guess, but I think all the other races are pretty similar, I'd say, depending on map and player.
Yeah, I think one thing I wanted to mention about that is that I think what often people when people they say is race hard or easy, I think it's better to talk about, because I've had this idea of a margin of error for playing the race. So Nightelf, for instance, is often seen as a relatively easy race to get into for free for all, because one of the armies they can make, which is just chimeras and hippos, has a very low margin of error. Chimeras only attack ground, hippos attack only air. So you can literally just attack, move, and have relatively pretty good success with it, even against pretty skilled players, because like the margin of error for that is very low. You only need to attack, move, and it still can do well, compared to, let's say, an orc army where we have casters and either ground or air, and you need to micro them pretty heavily. You have to cast Bloodlust, you have to cast Spirit Link, you have to cast your wards, you need to micro your wyverns away from like tanks. There's a lot of margin for error there. Like if you screw one thing up, that could potentially start a chain reaction of, oh shoot, I need to do this thing, but I need to remember how to do this thing. Oh no, wait, I got to do this. Oh crap, I'm now like flustered and behind, and now I'm not performing as normal, and I just lost my entire army. Like that is something that is like very, very real. And so in that sense, I think with Undead, the margin of error is pretty low, honestly, or pretty high rather, in that Undead has very strong heroes with the nukes, just like in 1-on-1, but their armies are pretty fragile. Like Gargoyles got a tiny buff recently, but they are kind of the preferred unit in most free-for-all comps because most people go air, and they require a lot of micro. For any new players who's not aware, Gargoyle AI is pretty shit. It's pretty crap. They have a tendency where if there is you'll see this, for instance, against Chippo. Like if you're fighting mass Gargs against mass Chippo, if you kill
Chim hippos.
Yes, chimeras and hippogriffs. If you kill all their hippogriffs and there's like 10 chimeras around, the gargoyle, if you attack move your Gargs, they will attack. Their priority is to something on the ground. So they will think that the hero with the orb is a higher priority. So if you attack move, gargoyles will attack the hero and just leave the chimeras just blowing your heroes up alone. So you must manually micro gargoyles pretty much constantly to like effectively win the air battles. And so that often leads to people screwing up. And it's like, it takes a lot of practice to do it. If you can get to that point, Undead is really, really strong. But I would say there's quite a bit of margin for error because, like, especially in the late game, your hero nuke is very strong, but for instance, human is better than you. Like, they're straight up better than you in like hero arena, because 2 of their units can get immune with Mountain King's Avatar and Paladin Divine Shield. So they just have better nukes. They're stronger than you, and especially with the new orb, which is bullshit, by the way. You have a bit of a disadvantage.
No.
So like playing Undead, I feel you kind of have to be very strategic in how you play and when you hit somebody, and trying to take advantage of little things like the early game. They're pretty strong, I'll admit. Like a Undead rush with like fiends and frostworms can take many races out unawares.
Yeah, I think Undead is like usually with like whatever you play, and usually, as you mentioned, it's triple heroes, so it's Death Knight, Lich, and Dreadlord nowadays. Dreadlord, due to the buffed Carrion Swarm, which can hit mechanical units since 130, patch 130, I think, is like the normal combination of heroes that you would go for. And usually most players will go into mass Gargs at some point. But as you mentioned, I think Undead is super solid, and not as difficult to play as Orc potentially. But as you mentioned, there is like a certain the margin for error is not the highest. And obviously an Undead base can die very quickly to certain units still. If you know how to creep well, and if you potentially want to rush someone with Fiends or with Necro Wagons, for example, then I think Undead is a very strong race these days.
Yeah, the recent buffs to Necromancers did make Necro Wagon a pretty, because it used to be a very kind of staple Undead strat, but it was still pretty clunky. Like it's if you have, the key for that strategy is, again, so for newer players, it's basically maybe like 2 to 3 meat wagons, 6 to 8 necromancers, maybe a couple fiends, is kind of your base 80 food army, and then for 100 food you'll probably add destroyers and frostworms to fill out kind of the heavy air part of that. If you can get stuff pre-cast, and that's the key thing, is like if someone catches you unaware with nothing cast, you will just die. There's nothing you can do. You just get blown up. Or if they catch their meat wagons from behind you.
Yeah.
But if you can get stuff pre-cast, like you have your Unholy Frenzies out, you have a bunch of skeletons already out, and then you attack somebody and someone's trying to fight into that, that can be very difficult depending on the race. So it's like potentially a very powerful strategy, but also again, the margin for error for that particular strategy is very high. But with the patch change, it did give a little bit of more three-dimensionality to Undead. Like before, it was pretty much just all mass Gargs or mass Frostworms are kind of the go-to strategies. So it does add it's like another element that Undead can access. And if I guess I can maybe in another podcast and get into like very specifically about like Undead strategies and matchups. But I guess an overview, like it's very particularly it's effective against humans, not so much against other races, but against human versus Undead is a very kind of hard counter matchup. Like each race can make something that can utterly hard counter the other race. So like mass Gargs versus mass Griffins. So then the human then switches into mass tanks and gyros, and then your guards just get obliterated. Cool. So you switch to Necro Wagon to try to counter that, and then they switch to mass Griffins again. Now you kind of have this kind of rock paper scissors matchup, which I find really fun to play.
Yeah. And especially like talking about the human race. So humans usually play Archmage first, Paladin third, and then second hero is either MK, and often, or more advanced players often play Panda second, sometimes Tinker or Alchemist, but usually it's the same as in other modes. It's Archmage, MK, Paladin, very solid. And while human was considered to, or is still considered to be the strongest race, I assume, human was weakened by like the tank nerf. On the other hand, as you mentioned, the buffed orb and also the buffed gyros provide some new options for humans. So I think human is in a very good state, and especially the buff of gyros made it more entertaining. Like they are more costly now, but also way more efficient. On the other hand, they can be hit by Carrion Swarm now, so that particularly affects the human undead matchup. But in general, human like has the big advantage of mass TP, which is still considered to be the best ultimate in the game for FFA, and it's just so powerful if it's utilized well. And second, the masonry upgrades, which make human buildings very, very hard to kill. And these two things combined with just very strong units and very flexible army compositions make human very, very strong. Obviously, there's a slight weakness of lumber, and early on, it's very unless the human goes for tier 2 push or a push with riflemen, it has there is a window where human is quite low on lumber usually and can be killed rather easily. But especially if a human has mass gold, it's it can become quite tricky to deal with a human that can just mass TP around the map. So yeah, human definitely a fun race to play. And one of the stronger races, as we also see in the list of FML winners in throughout all years. So since season 1, humans won a lot of FML seasons. And next, Orc. Yeah, Orcs usually go for Blade Master, TC Shadowhunter or Shadowhunter TC, and there's some other options like Dark Ranger first or Alchemist first, but with a recent buff of the Blade Master, Blade Masters came back as the primary option with the new old crit. It's Orc just relies a lot on Blade Master damage, as Orc does in other game modes too. And while orcs with a lot of gold can be very, very dangerous, Orc can be defeated most easily late game, and has the biggest lumber issues usually. So that's tricky for Orc. And anti-air, obviously, like bats can be very cool, but only if the Orc has mass gold, and only if the enemy has like air units that do not have 3 defense upgrades or do not have enough fire. But yeah, that makes it a bit tricky. But in general, I think Orc, I guess I'm not an Orc player, but with a hero focus, if you do have high level heroes, it's one of the best hero combinations to really slay other heroes. And yeah, you can just stack your Blade Master.
Yeah, with Alchemist is also another very popular, like in this current meta, first choice here. And I think, I don't know, I guess with it's funny to say the new old crit, but with the old crit being back, I guess Blade Master came back into being like a strong contender. I think generally speaking, Alchemist is stronger overall, but it does give you it does make you a higher target for teaming. So there's, I guess, a con in that sense. But yeah, and I think with generally speaking, games in this day and age tend to be much more faster. People tend to be a little bit more aggressive now compared to back then, where people usually tended to be more of a hoarding thing. That's where Orc tends to shine a bit more, because you can run around. I think Orc has probably one of the better 50 food armies, because we've seen players like, for instance, Inna run around with just 50 food, and it kind of almost looks like a regular army, but he's actually only at 50, hoarding a ton of gold and still being effective. Like your 3 heroes, maybe 1 or 2 casters each, and then like a couple of Wyvern, and you can kill stuff decently well, because, you know, Bloodlusted Blade Master or Bloodlusted Alchemist plus Stomp, and Hexa Stomp is the best combo in the game, I think, for lockdown. Chain Heal, probably the best heal in the game. So with hero levels, you're pretty strong, but as mentioned earlier, that margin for error in your army fighting is pretty high. Like, you have to be able to have quick hands, get your micro out for your casters. All 3 of them need to use. Your hero abilities need to use, and actually just microing your like actual fighting units. It is a very micro intensive race. And yeah, as mentioned, lumber issues are a big thing. So maps with shredders, they tend to suffer pretty heavily. Like, they will usually be like by far the last to get their upgrades.
Yeah, I agree. And that like leads us to the Night Elf race, the one that has the fewest issues with lumber, having wisps all around the map. And yeah, Night Elf, being a Night Elf player myself, like I started Warcraft 3 only because of Night Elf. Like, that's the reason I bought it. And I understand why people, or many players, are frustrated playing against Night Elf. Like, it was in 101, or it was even worse in, I think, in around patch 130. But it's kind of the same in FFA, and it's like, I think it's a bit annoying. Like, you on one hand, Elf surely is like one of the strongest 2 races, I guess, and is just very flexible. Moonworlds are super strong, and Night Elf overall has very few weaknesses, apart from potentially Hero Arena if you don't play Demon Hunter. It's just I think the only major weakness of Night Elf, to face triple undead hero, triple orc, or human hero late game. So usually, like, Night Elf has the flexibility, but these days Night Elf often gets blamed for being too strong. So I personally enjoy like the flexibility, and hero combo wise, also very dependent on the individual's playstyle. I started to play Tinker basically every game, so Tinker, Panda. I know, yeah, but the Tinker is just so fun, and as you mentioned earlier, Alchemist was another very favorable option for first hero, but Alchemist just not good for games, so it's stalling games, the transmute. So Night Elf usually goes for Tinker first, then Panda Keeper, or Dark Ranger first, then Panda Keeper, Panda first, then Potom, the Priestess of the Moon, and then Keeper. Or if you don't want to pick a Tavern hero, it's usually Demon Hunter, and then if you play like Trunks, which is the strongest active Night Elf player, you pick Naga second and Priestess third, which is very, very strong. Like has a lot of damage output that you usually don't have as Night Elf from heroes. And yeah, the buildings of Night Elf do have the advantage that you can hide them out on the map, so it's difficult to finish Night Elf players that hide somewhere, and it's just easy. Like, you can play a lot of different units as Night Elf, but you can also just stick to chimeras and hippos, and several Night Elf players were successful with it, even in competitive FFA, just playing nothing but hippos and chimeras, which just is very cost efficient, and you have a great damage against buildings, but also against units and heroes. And hippos also very strong anti-air units that you don't even need to micro, really, because they can only attack air. So and on top you only have like one tech tree in your Hunter's Hall. So it's like Night Elf, very flexible and very efficient. As I mentioned, the weaknesses of Night Elf, probably late game hero arena, and there is a time window where Night Elf can be rushed out rather easily, especially if the Night Elf has no Demon Hunter. It's a weakness, but I think that shouldn't prevent anyone from playing Night Elf, but it also comes with a lot of blame for like the state of the game.
Yeah, that's one thing Elf has always been known for, is that there is such a flexibility and diversity in playstyles, and especially hero choices. Because like Undead, you're pretty much just always going DK Lich DL. For human, it's again AMMK PAL is like the safest and probably just the strongest over, like, and most reliable. As you mentioned, some advanced players go Panda second, but that again just changes the playstyle of the race. But you can pretty much never go wrong with, for human and Undead, those three heroes. Orc, a little bit more flexibility, your first hero, but you pretty much always kind of want TC Shadowhunter, because they are just way too good for like 99% of players. I'd say if you're not going those heroes, it's probably a wrong choice, I'd say, generally speaking. But Elf just gets the flexibility of, because you have the two strong heroes, like from the race itself, Keeper, Potom. They both have great ultimates, great abilities, and then the playstyle of what you want to do then changes your first hero, or first two heroes, I guess. As you mentioned, Trunks is he's a unique free-for-all player in that he goes for mostly Elf ground armies, so it's archer based or hippogriff rider based, where the raw damage output combined with DH Naga Potom, the raw damage output is just insane. People also tend to forget Naga's nuke is actually the strongest single damage nuke in the game at 250 damage. So that combined with the focused fire, with Fairy Fire, Demon Hunter, the entire army getting 30% damage from True Shot Aura, he can delete heroes like way faster than people realize. And that's like a thing. Like, if you're not experienced playing against the Trunks style, you will lose your heroes very quickly if you're not paying attention.
Yeah. I think he brought that style into FFA, and that's like the perfect, and also maybe a perfect story to just end this podcast, or to round it up. That it's really possible to have your own style, find your own style, and as long as you follow some FFA basics, you can be successful. If you avoid getting frustrated and leave FFA behind quickly, it bears the potential for a lot of fun And if you want to become part of the FFA Masters community, it provides some additional dimension of fun and chaos, but it's in my eyes the perfect mix between a clan and a community. So I personally what else am I supposed to say? I'm an admin, but I think it's very fun.
That's a good. That was a point I was going to bring up earlier enough, but thank you for reminding me. But yeah, the community aspect again is another part of why free for all is such a fun aspect. Is that yes, sure, within our own community, especially in in-house games, if you do lose, yeah, there's an additional chance for flaming, getting upset after a match and things like that. But there's also the plus side of that is that we've been playing this game together for, some of us have been playing literally 10, 15 years. Some of the American players, since I've been playing against them since 2005. And that community aspect is what really is fun. Where Discord's very active. We're always talking about games, always having in-house games. So if you're all interested, please come on by. We try not to be too hard on new guys, and many of our players will be happy to give advice and tips and things like that. And maybe you'll be like me, who came purely from the solo background, never played team games, and now I kind of don't want to play one-on-one. All I want to play is just free-for-all.
Yeah, and over time, there's just a slight risk that you forget how to play one-on-one if you play FFA for too long, I guess. All right.
That's pretty much everything we've got.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for listening. This was a live show, but we will upload it to YouTube also. If you want to join us, then you find the Discord link on ffamasters.com. On the top right there is a link to the Discord server and also to some great FFA guides and map packs that map packs, not map packs, that should help you to have a good start in the community. And thanks Vyvanne for joining me.
So much. And if anybody has any questions or want clarity on anything else, absolutely feel free to reach out to us in comments or on the Discord. We'll be more than happy to go into detail. And this is always kind of work in progress, so we'll keep generating content.
Yeah, we do. And thanks, and have a good one. Bye bye.